Science says that when we are in danger, our bodies do one of two things: fight or run away. Your heart beats fast, you get scared, you panic. But on a rainy Tuesday night, Seraphina didn't do any of those things. When a man in a mask pressed a cold gun right against her head, she didn't beg for her life, she didn't even blink. She just checked her watch and sighed. She looked bored. It was so cold and strange that the whole room felt frozen. In the back booth, a dangerous man was watching. He was the only person in the city who realized that her empty look wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. The bright blue lights of the Blue Moon Diner buzzed loudly. That sound would drive most people crazy. For Seraphina, it was just the soundtrack of her life. She stood behind the counter and smoothed out her light blue uniform. She made sure everything was perfect. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and not a single hair was out of place. She wore bright red lipstick and stood up straight like a soldier. She wasn't just a waitress, she was like a statue. Inside, she felt empty, like nothing could hurt her. It was 3:14 in the morning. Rain hit the glass windows. In the corner booth, a man in a fancy gray suit sat with a cup of tea. His name was Tae-chon, but people in the underworld called him the chairman. He didn't look at the menu. He was only looking at her. Suddenly, the front door crashed open. A man in a black mask ran inside, bringing the smell of rain and trouble with him. "Give me the money, now," the gunman screamed. He jumped toward the counter and shoved his gun right against Seraphina's head. But Seraphina didn't put her hands up. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at the reflection in the toaster behind him. She was annoyed that he was getting mud on her clean floor. In the back booth, Tae-chon leaned forward, his dark eyes watching closely. The show was just beginning. The metal barrel of the gun dug a little deeper into Seraphina's temple. It was cold and hard, a stark difference from the humid, rainy air rushing in through the open door. The masked man was breathing heavy, ragged breaths that fogged up the space between them. He smelled like old cigarettes and wet pavement. "I said open the register," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Do it now or I'll blow your head off." Seraphina didn't move toward the register. She didn't gasp. She didn't tremble. Instead, she slowly moved her eyes from the toaster's reflection to the man's face. The black ski mask covered everything but his eyes and mouth, but that was enough. His eyes were wide and darting around the room, full of panic. Sweat was already soaking into the fabric around his forehead. She looked at him, not at the gun but right into his eyes. It wasn't a look of anger. It wasn't a look of fear. It was the kind of look a person gives a fly that keeps buzzing around their food, mild annoyance. "You're making a mess," Seraphina said. Her voice was flat. It didn't sound like a victim's voice. It sounded like a teacher scolding a student for running in the hall. The gunman froze. The gun wavered in his hand. "What?" "My floor," she said, pointing a manicured finger toward his muddy boots. "I just mopped that section. You're tracking mud everywhere." The silence that followed was heavy. It stretched out, filling the diner like thick smoke. The buzzing of the blue neon sign seemed to get louder. BZZZT, BZZZT. The robber blinked, confused. He pushed the gun harder against her head, trying to regain control. "Are you crazy, lady? I have a gun. Give me the cash." Seraphina let out a long, tired sigh. She looked at her wrist. Her watch was a small, silver thing ticking away the seconds of her shift. "It's 3:15, she said. "The police do their shift change in 5 minutes. The station is 2 blocks away. If you leave now, you might make it before the patrol cars start rolling." She paused, then tilted her head slightly, her perfect bun not moving an inch. "Or you can stay here and keep shouting. But I don't have the key to the safe. Only the manager does, and he's asleep in the back. He sleeps heavy." The robber stared at her. His hands started to shake. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Victims were supposed to cry. They were supposed to beg. When people don't act the way they are supposed to, it makes other people nervous. It makes them think they are missing something. "Why aren't you scared?" the robber whispered. The aggression was leaking out of him, replaced by creeping dread. He looked around the empty diner, suddenly paranoid. Is this a trap? Are there cops here? Seraphina didn't answer. She just held his gaze, her dark eyes empty and unblinking. She was a mirror, reflecting his own fear back at him. She looked at him as if he didn't exist, as if he was already a ghost. The unnerving silence broke him. "You're a freak," he yelled, pulling the gun away. He stumbled backward, his boots squeaking on the wet linoleum. He looked at the door, then back at her, then at the dark windows. The stillness of the woman behind the counter was more terrifying than any siren. "I'm leaving," he shouted as if he needed permission. "Don't you follow me." He turned and bolted, crashing through the door and disappearing into the rainy night. He didn't take a single dollar. Seraphina watched the door swing shut. The bell jingled, a happy, cheerful sound that felt wrong after the violence. She didn't let out a breath of relief. Her heart rate hadn't even spiked. Calmly, she reached under the counter and pulled out a rag. She walked around the counter to the spot where the man had stood. She bent down and began to wipe the muddy footprints off the blue and white tiles. Scrub, scrub, scrub. The rhythm was soothing. She needed the floor to be perfect again. From the back of the diner, a slow clapping sound broke the quiet. Clap, clap, clap. Seraphina stopped scrubbing, but she didn't look up immediately. She finished the spot she was working on, stood up, and smoothed her apron. Only then did she turn. Tae-chon was standing up from the teal booth. He looked like he belonged in a magazine, not a cheap diner at 3:00 a.m. His charcoal suit was wrinkle-free, and his tie was a dark silk knot. He picked up his teacup and took a final sip, his eyes never leaving Seraphina. He walked toward her. He didn't walk like the robber, rushing and clumsy. He moved like water, smooth, quiet, and dangerous. "Interesting technique," he said. His voice was deep and smooth. "Most people would be shaking. You worried about the floor." Seraphina looked at him. She recognized the expensive cut of his suit and the way he carried himself. She knew he wasn't a normal customer, but she felt the same emptiness she felt with the robber. "Dirt stains the grout if you leave it too long," she said simply. Tae-chon stopped in front of the counter. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something crisp like pine needles and expensive leather. He studied her face, searching for a crack in the mask. He looked for a tremble in her lip or fear in her eyes. He found nothing. "You are not normal, miss." He glanced at her name tag. "Seraphina." "I'm just tired," she lied. "No," Tae-chon said softly. "Tired is what you feel after a long shift, what you have. That is something else. That is a gift." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. For a second, a normal person might have flinched, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. Seraphina just watched. He pulled out a small, rectangular card. It was black with gold lettering. He placed it gently on the counter, right next to the sugar dispenser. "The world is full of sheep," Tae-chon said. "They panic, they bleed, they need to be saved." He leaned in closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Wolves do not panic, and you, Seraphina, are definitely not a sheep." Seraphina looked down at the card. It didn't have a phone number or a company name. It just had a symbol, a golden lotus flower, and a short phrase written in elegant handwriting. "For when you outgrow this cage." "I need a manager," Tae-chon said, straightening his jacket. "Someone who can see the dirt before it stains the floor. Someone who doesn't blink when the gun is pointed at them." He turned toward the door. "Keep the change," he said, though he hadn't paid a bill. He left a $100 bill on the table in the booth. Seraphina stood alone in the buzzing diner. She looked at the black card. For the first time all night, her finger twitched. She picked up the card. The edges were sharp. It felt heavy, like it was made of metal, not paper. She looked at the reflection in the window. She saw the perfect bun, the red lipstick, the blue uniform. It did look like a cage. She slid the card into her apron pocket, right next to her order pad. Then she grabbed the mop bucket. The floor was still a little dirty near the door. The internet moves faster than police cars. By the time Seraphina clocked in for her next shift, the video had already been viewed 3 million times. Someone outside the diner had filmed the robbery through the window. The shaky footage showed the gunman screaming and waving his weapon. It showed the terror on the faces of the young couple in the corner. But mostly, it showed Seraphina. The camera zoomed in on her face as the gun pressed against her skin. It captured her sigh, her check of the watch, and her bored expression. The comment section was a cruel place. "Is she a robot?" one comment asked. "She's a cyborg, look at her eyes. Nothing behind them," said another. "Ice Queen, that's not brave, that's creepy." By noon, the internet had given her a name, the Robot Waitress. Mr. Miller, the owner of the Blue Moon Diner, called her into his small, greasy office before she could even tie her apron. He was a nervous man who sweated when he was stressed. Today, he was sweating a lot. He kept wiping his bald head with a handkerchief. "Seraphina," he said, not looking her in the eye, "we have a problem." Seraphina stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her uniform was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the piles of messy paperwork on Mr. Miller's desk. "The floor is clean, Mr. Miller. The inventory is done." "It's not the work," Mr. Miller said, his voice shaking. He turned his computer monitor around. The video was paused on a close-up of her face. "It's this. People are scared, Seraphina, not of the robber, they are scared of you." Seraphina looked at her own face on the screen. She didn't feel shame. She didn't feel anger. She just noticed that the pixelated image didn't show the red of her lipstick very well. "Reporters have been calling all morning," Mr. Miller continued. "They want to know if I hire sociopaths. They want to know if the diner is safe. This kind of attention, it's bad for business. People come here for comfort food, not whatever this is." He slid a white envelope across the desk. It looked thin. "This is your last paycheck, plus 2 weeks of pay. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." Seraphina looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Mr. Miller. A normal person might have argued. They might have cried about unfairness or rent money. Seraphina simply reached out and took the envelope. "I understand," she said. Her voice was as flat as the line on a heart monitor. "You want normal. I am not normal." "It's just the way you looked at him," Mr. Miller stammered, feeling guilty now. "It wasn't human, Seraphina." "It was efficient," she corrected. She turned around and walked out of the office. She went to her locker and took out her purse and her coat. She took off her blue apron, folded it into a perfect square, and placed it on the bench. She didn't say goodbye to the cook. She didn't look at the booth where the robbery happened. She just walked to the front door and pushed it open. Outside, the sky had broken open. The rain wasn't just falling, it was punishing the pavement. It was a heavy, cold downpour that turned the streets of South Boston into gray rivers. Seraphina stepped out onto the sidewalk. The door swung shut behind her, cutting off the smell of coffee and bacon. Now, there was only the smell of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. She didn't open an umbrella. She didn't run for cover. She just stood there. The rain soaked her hair immediately. Water ran down her face, ruining the perfect bun she had spent 20 minutes making. It dripped off her chin, but Seraphina didn't move. She stood under the flickering neon sign of the diner, which buzzed and clicked above her head. "Busy, busy." She was fired. She had no job. Her rent was due in 3 days. Most people would be panicking right now. Their hearts would be racing. But Seraphina just felt the cold water hitting her skin and thought about the physics of it. Gravity pulling water down. Impact. Displacement. She was a statue in the storm. People rushed past her, holding newspapers over their heads, running for buses. They looked at her like she was crazy. Maybe she was, or maybe she was just waiting. Then the sound of the street changed. The noise of the splashing tires and honking horns seemed to fade away. A low, powerful hum replaced it. A car turned the corner. It wasn't a taxi or a beat-up sedan. It was a long, sleek black car that looked like a shark gliding through deep water. A Maybach. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like black mirrors. The rain beaded up on the wax paint, sliding off like it was afraid to touch the metal. The car slowed down as it approached the diner. It didn't screech to a halt. It came to a stop right in front of Seraphina, smooth and silent. The back window rolled down. The interior of the car was warm and dry. The leather seats were a deep, rich cream color. Sitting there, looking just as perfect as he had in the diner, was Tae-chon. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He was leaning back, one leg crossed over the other. He held a phone in his hand, and on the screen, Seraphina could see the video of the robbery playing. He paused it with his thumb. He looked out at her. He took in her soaked uniform, her ruined hair, and the white envelope clutched in her hand. He didn't look pitying. He looked satisfied. "I told you," Tae-chon said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "The cage was too small." Seraphina looked at him. Water dripped from her eyelashes. "I got fired." "Mr. Miller is a coward," Tae-chon said simply. "Cowards fear what they cannot understand. He thinks you are broken because you do not break." He pushed the car door open. It swung out heavily, inviting her in. "The world is wet and cold, Seraphina," Tae-chon said. He gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Inside it is dry, and I have a job opening for someone who scares the sheep." Seraphina looked back at the diner. Through the window, she could see Mr. Miller wiping the counter, looking nervous. Then she looked at the black car. It was dangerous. She knew who this man was. Everyone in the city knew the rumors about the Korean Mafia. Getting into this car was crossing a line she could never uncross. But standing in the rain, feeling the cold seep into her bones, Seraphina realized something. She didn't want to be warm. She wanted to be useful. She stepped off the curb. She didn't look back. She slid into the leather seat, bringing the smell of rain with her. Tae-chon pulled the door shut. The sound of the city vanished, replaced by the quiet, heavy silence of the luxury car. "Drive," Tae-chon said to the driver. As the car pulled away, Seraphina looked at her reflection in the dark window. Her bun was destroyed, but her red lipstick was still perfect. The Maybach glided to a stop in an alley that smelled like rain and expensive perfume. It was a strange combination. To the left was a brick wall covered in graffiti. To the right was a heavy steel door with no handle and no sign. The driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, opened the door for them. Seraphina stepped out. Her diner shoes, sensible and rubber-soled, squeaked on the wet concrete. She was still shivering slightly from the rain, her powder blue uniform clinging to her skin like a cold second skin. Tae-chon stepped out behind her. He didn't look at the graffiti. He walked straight to the steel door. He didn't knock. He simply stood in front of a small camera lens embedded in the metal. Click, buzz, thud. The door groaned open. "Welcome to the Golden Lotus," Tae-chon said. He didn't smile. He gestured for her to enter. Seraphina expected a warehouse. She expected smoke and loud shouting, like in the movies. What she found was a palace buried underground. They walked down a long staircase lined with red velvet. The air here was cool and dry, filtered to perfection. The smell of old grease and coffee from the diner was gone, replaced by the scent of jasmine and crisp money. At the bottom of the stairs, the room opened up. It was massive. The ceiling was painted gold, and crystal chandeliers hung down like frozen waterfalls. Below them, dozens of tables were set up. Men in tuxedos and women in silk dresses sat around them, playing cards and spinning wheels. But it was quiet. There was no cheering. There was no yelling. The only sounds were the soft click-clack of chips being stacked and the shhhshhh of cards being shuffled. It was a library of vice. Seraphina's eyes scanned the room automatically. She wasn't looking at the beauty. She was counting. 3 exits, 4 security guards by the north wall, 2 by the south. The dealer at table 5 is sweating. The waitress at table 9 is shaking. "You see it, don't you?" Tae-chon asked, walking beside her. "See what?" Seraphina asked. "The patterns," he said, "the tiny cracks in the painting." He led her past the tables. Every guard they passed bowed deeply, bending at the waist. They didn't look at Tae-chon. They looked at the floor. They were terrified of him. When they saw Seraphina, wet, messy, and wearing a cheap waitress uniform, they looked confused. But they didn't dare say a word. Tae-chon led her to a set of double doors at the back of the room. He pushed them open, revealing a large office. It was stark and modern. One wall was entirely made of glass, looking out over the casino floor. From here, you could see everything. It was the eye of the storm. "Sit," Tae-chon commanded. He pointed to a black leather chair in front of a glass desk. Seraphina sat. She felt ridiculous in her soggy clothes, but she folded her hands in her lap and sat with her back straight. She stared at a painting on the wall, a single black brushstroke on a white canvas. Tae-chon walked behind his desk. He didn't sit. He leaned against the edge, crossing his arms. "Let us be clear about one thing, Seraphina," he said. His voice was serious. "I did not bring you here because I am lonely. I do not need a girlfriend. I have plenty of people who want to be in my bed." Seraphina didn't blink. "I didn't think you wanted to date me. You tipped me $100 on a bill you didn't pay. That's a power move, not a date." A ghost of a smile touched Tae-chon's lips. "Smart, correct. I brought you here because my business has a problem. I have muscles, I have guns, I have men who can break legs, but I do not have eyes." He gestured to the glass wall, looking down at the gamblers below. "People come here to lie," he said. "They lie about their cards, they lie about their money, my staff. They are easily scared. If a man shouts, they flinch. If a man threatens them, they look away. You." He looked back at her. "You looked down the barrel of a gun and complained about the floor." "It was a clean floor," Seraphina said defensively. "Exactly," Tae-chon said. "I need a floor manager, someone who stands in the center of the chaos and does not feel it, someone who can watch the dealers, the players, and the guards and tell me who is lying. Can you do that?" Seraphina looked through the glass. She watched the room below. It was just a system. Inputs and outputs, risks and rewards. It was cleaner than the diner. There was no grease here, just math and psychology. "The pay?" she asked. $5,000 a week, Tae-chon said, "plus a place to live, a quiet place, no buzzing lights." Seraphina nodded once. It was a logical choice. "I accept." Tae-chon pushed a black box across the desk. It was heavy and tied with a silk ribbon. "Then get changed," he said. "You look like a drowned rat, and in the Golden Lotus we do not wear polyester." Seraphina took the box. She walked to the small private bathroom attached to the office. She locked the door and set the box on the marble counter. Inside she found her new armor. It wasn't a dress. It wasn't a revealing outfit meant to distract men. It was a suit. The fabric was black silk and wool, soft and expensive. The pants were tailored to fit perfectly, and the jacket had sharp shoulders that looked like blades. There was a crisp white shirt, buttoned all the way to the neck. It was severe. It was professional. It was clothing for a predator, not prey. Seraphina peeled off the wet blue uniform. She dropped it into the trash can without a second thought. She dried her hair with a plush towel, smoothing it back until it was tight against her skull again. She twisted it into her signature bun. Not a single strand was allowed to escape. She put on the suit. It felt like a hug from a shadow. It fit her perfectly, as if Tae-chon had known her measurements just by looking at her. Finally she looked in the mirror. She looked different, stronger, darker. But her face was too pale. She looked like a ghost in a suit. She reached into her purse and pulled out her tube of lipstick. It was the one thing she had kept from her old life. She twisted it up. The color was victory red. With a steady hand, she applied the color to her lips. One swipe, two swipes. She blotted them on a tissue. The red slashed across her pale face like a wound, or maybe a warning. It was the only color on her. It said that underneath the black suit and the cold eyes, there was still a fire burning, even if it was made of ice. She opened the bathroom door and stepped back into the office. Tae-chon was waiting. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Better," he said. "Now come here, look at table 4, tell me what you see." Seraphina walked to the glass wall. She looked down at the man at table 4. He was laughing too loud. His left hand was tapping the table 3 times every time he lost. "He's cheating," Seraphina said instantly. "He's signaling the dealer with his ring." Tae-chon smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "Welcome to the family, Seraphina." The Golden Lotus was not just a casino. It was a machine. To most people, it looked like a party. The crystal chandeliers sparkled, the jazz music played softly, and the guests laughed while drinking expensive champagne. But Seraphina didn't see a party. She saw math. She stood on the balcony overlooking the main floor. Her new black suit fit her like a glove. Her hair was pulled back so tightly that it felt like it was holding her thoughts in place. The only color on her was the slash of victory red lipstick across her mouth. 3 days had passed since the rain and the Maybach. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the floor manager. Her job was simple: watch everything. Kim Tae-chon stood next to her. He was silent as usual. He liked to watch her watch the room. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what is the count?" Seraphina's eyes darted back and forth. She didn't move her head. She just moved her eyes, scanning the tables below like a security camera. "Table 3 is losing money on purpose to distract the dealer," she said, her voice flat. "The waitress at table 6 is flirting with the guard to get a bigger tip, and the man in the blue tuxedo at table 9. He isn't breathing right." Tae-chon raised an eyebrow. "Breathing?" "He holds his breath every time the dealer flips a face card," Seraphina explained. "He's nervous, but he keeps winning." She focused on table 9. It was a blackjack table. There were 3 men sitting there. They didn't look like friends. They didn't talk to each other. One was older, wearing a cheap gray suit. One was young, wearing glasses. And the third was the man in the blue tuxedo who had a pile of chips in front of him as big as a castle. Most people would think the man in the blue tuxedo was just lucky. Seraphina knew there was no such thing as luck. There was only patterns. "Watch the man in the gray suit," Seraphina said. "He bets the minimum, $5. He never raises his bet." "And?" Tae-chon asked. "Watch his hand. Every time a high card comes out, a 10, a jack, a queen, a king, he touches his earlobe, just a scratch, it looks natural." She waited. The dealer flipped a king of hearts. The man in the gray suit scratched his ear. Instantly, the man in the blue tuxedo pushed a huge stack of chips forward. He hit on a 16. It was a risky move, a stupid move, but the next card was a 4. He won. "They are counting cards," Seraphina said. She sounded bored. "It's a team. The gray suit counts the deck. The blue tuxedo waits for the signal to bet big. The kid with the glasses is just there to distract the dealer with loud questions." Tae-chon looked at her. He looked impressed, but he didn't smile. "Security usually takes an hour to catch a team like that. You took 5 minutes." He reached for his radio to call the guards. "I will have them removed." "No," Seraphina said. She put a hand on his arm. It was a bold move. No one touched the chairman, but she pulled her hand away quickly. "If you send guards, they will cause a scene. They will scream. They will deny it. It breaks the mood of the room. Bad for business." She adjusted her cuffs. "Let me handle it." Tae-chon lowered the radio. "Be careful. Men who steal from me do not like to be caught." Seraphina walked down the velvet stairs. She didn't rush. She walked with the same steady, rhythmic click-clack of her heels that she used to have at the diner. She walked right up to table 9. The dealer, a young woman named Mina, looked relieved to see her. Mina was sweating. She knew she was losing too much of the house's money, but she didn't know why. "Pause the game, please," Seraphina said softly. The man in the blue tuxedo looked up. He had a sweaty, red face. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Is there a problem, sweetheart? I'm on a hot streak. Don't cool me down." Seraphina didn't smile back. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at the man in the gray suit. "Your left ear must be very itchy," she said. The man in the gray suit froze. His hand was halfway to his ear. He slowly lowered it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Since you sat down 40 minutes ago," Seraphina said, reciting the data from her head, "you have scratched your ear 42 times. Each time a face card was on the table. Each time your friend here bet exactly $500. The table went quiet. The other players stopped watching the cards and started watching Seraphina. The man in the blue tuxedo stood up. He was big. He towered over Seraphina. He tried to look scary. He tried to use his size to make her back down. "Listen, lady," he growled. "You're imagining things. We're just playing cards. You can't prove anything. Now get out of my face before I complain to your boss." Seraphina didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She tilted her head just like she had with the robber. She looked at his forehead, then at his tie, then right into his eyes. "You are boring me," she said. It was the same tone she had used on the gunman. It wasn't an insult. It was a fact. She looked at him like he was a math problem she had already solved. "The count is +12, she said simply. "The deck is hot. You were waiting for the dealer to bust, but now the count is 0 because the game is over." She leaned in closer. She didn't whisper, but her voice was low and cold. "You have 2 choices. Choice A, you cash out your original buy-in, the money you came with, and you walk out that door. You never come back." She checked her watch. "Choice B, I calculate exactly how much you stole. Then I call the man in the office upstairs. He doesn't like math as much as I do, but he really likes breaking fingers." She looked at the man in the gray suit. "And your ear, he will make sure it never itches again." The silence at the table was heavy. The man in the blue tuxedo looked at his friends. He looked at the security guard standing by the wall. But mostly he looked at Seraphina. He looked at the perfect bun, the red lipstick, and the dead, empty eyes. He realized she wasn't bluffing. She wasn't even angry. She was just cleaning up a mess. "We're leaving," the man in the gray suit whispered. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly on the floor. The 3 men grabbed their original chips. They didn't take the winnings. They scrambled away from the table, rushing toward the exit like schoolboys who had been caught cheating on a test. Seraphina watched them go. She turned to Mina, the dealer. "Shuffle the deck," Seraphina said calmly, "and straighten your tie, Mina, it's crooked." She turned and walked back toward the stairs. She didn't look back to see if they were gone. She knew they were. From the balcony, Tae-chon watched her ascend. A small, rare smile played on his lips. He wasn't looking at the money she had saved him. He was looking at her. "The algorithm," he whispered to himself. When Seraphina reached the top of the stairs, she stood beside him again. She didn't ask for praise. She just looked out over the floor. "Table 4 is still cheating," she said. "But he's just bad at it. Let him play. He'll lose it all back in 10 minutes. Tae-chon nodded. "As you wish." For the first time, Seraphina felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was a tiny, warm spark. It felt like belonging. The VIP room of the Golden Lotus was buried deep underground, far beneath the noisy casino floor. It was a room where sound went to die. The walls were lined with thick, dark leather that absorbed every whisper. There were no windows, no clocks, and no cameras. In this room, powerful men played for things much more valuable than money. They played for territory, for ships, and for lives. Tonight, the air in the room was heavy. It smelled of expensive cigars and cold ambition. Kim Tae-chon sat at the head of the oval table. He looked relaxed, leaning back in his chair with a glass of water untouched in front of him. Across from him sat Chairman Han. Chairman Han was the head of the Black Snake clan. He was an older man with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a smile that looked like a jagged crack in a rock. He was Tae-chon's biggest rival. For years, they had fought over the city's ports. Tonight, they were playing poker to settle a dispute about a shipping route. Seraphina stood in the shadows near the bar. She was invisible. To the men at the table, she was just part of the furniture, a woman in a black suit who refilled drinks and emptied ashtrays. But Seraphina was not serving drinks. She was recording everything. Her eyes scanned the room in a constant, rhythmic loop. Door, guard, table, hands, door, guard, table, hands. Everything had a pattern. The dealer shuffled the cards with a specific snap. Chairman Han tapped his cigar twice before taking a puff. Tae-chon checked his cards by lifting the corners exactly 1 inch off the felt. Then there was June. June was Tae-chon's lieutenant. He was his right-hand man, his bodyguard, and his oldest friend. He stood directly behind Tae-chon's chair, his hands clasped in front of him, staring blankly at the wall. June was famous for his loyalty. People called him the Stone because he never moved and never spoke. But tonight the stone was cracking. Seraphina's brain felt a sudden, sharp itch. It was her obsessive-compulsive disorder kicking in. To Seraphina, the world was a messy picture that she always had to straighten. If a painting was crooked, she had to fix it. If a tile was chipped, she couldn't look away. And right now, June was crooked. It started with a small movement. Tae-chon lifted the corners of his cards to peek at his hand. He had a pair of kings. It was a strong hand. Behind him, June shifted his weight from his left foot to his right foot. Then, he reached up and brushed a piece of invisible lint off his left lapel. Across the table, Chairman Han's eyes flickered. He looked at June for a split second, then looked back at his own cards. Han folded his hand immediately. He didn't even try to bluff. Seraphina narrowed her eyes. Coincidence, she told herself. People move, people get itchy. 3 hands later, Tae-chon checked his cards again. This time he had nothing. A 2 and a 7, a garbage hand. Behind him, June reached up and touched the knot of his tie. He tightened it just a fraction of an inch. Chairman Han smiled. He pushed a mountain of chips into the center of the table. "All in," he said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. Tae-chon looked surprised. He had to fold. He lost the pot. Seraphina felt the itch turn into a burn. Her mind started replaying the last hour of the game like a movie tape. She rewound the memories. Hand 4, Tae-chon has a flush. June touches his lapel. Hand folds. Hand 9, Tae-chon has a pair. June touches his lapel. Hand folds. Hand 12, Tae-chon has nothing. June touches his tie. Hand bets big. It wasn't an itch anymore. It was a siren screaming in her head. June wasn't just fidgeting, he was signaling. When he touched the left side of his suit, the lapel, it meant Tae-chon was strong. When he touched the center, the tie, it meant Tae-chon was weak. Seraphina felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just cheating. This was betrayal. June was the one person Tae-chon trusted with his life. He was the one who checked the car for bombs. He was the one who tasted the food for poison. If June was working with the Black Snake clan, then Tae-chon was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. She looked at Tae-chon. He was calm, focused on the cards. He had no idea that the man standing at his back holding the sword was getting ready to stab him. Seraphina took a step forward from the shadows. Her heart stayed slow, but her mind was racing. She needed to stop the game, but she couldn't make a scene. If she accused June right now in front of Chairman Han, violence would explode. There were 6 guards in the room. 3 belonged to Tae-chon and 3 belonged to Han. If guns were drawn, people would die. She had to be the algorithm again. She had to be the floor manager. She walked over to the table with a silver pitcher of water. Her heels clicked softly on the floor. Click, click, click. She stopped beside Chairman Han. He ignored her, his greedy eyes fixed on the pile of chips he was winning. "More water, sir?" she asked. Han grunted, not looking up. Seraphina poured the water. As she did, she looked directly at June. June was looking at Han, waiting for the next signal. But then he felt eyes on him. He turned his head slightly and locked eyes with Seraphina. For a second the mask slipped. Seraphina saw panic in June's eyes. He saw the red lipstick. He saw the dead, bored stare that missed nothing. He realized that she had been watching him the entire time. Seraphina didn't blink. She didn't look away. She poured the water perfectly, not spilling a drop. Then she turned her gaze to his tie. She stared at the knot he had just touched. She raised her eyebrows slightly. It was a microscopic movement, but it screamed, "I see you." June went pale. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Seraphina finished pouring. She set the pitcher down on a side table with a soft clink. "The air in here is very dry tonight," she said to the room. Her voice was flat and devoid of emotion. "It makes people thirsty. It makes them fidget." Tae-chon looked up at her. He heard the hidden note in her voice. He knew Seraphina didn't make small talk. She only spoke facts. He looked at Seraphina. She tilted her head toward June, just a fraction of an inch, and then tapped her own collarbone. Tae-chon didn't turn around. He didn't look at June. He was a professional. His face remained a mask of calm. But his hand, which had been reaching for his card, stopped. He slowly pulled it back. "I think I am done for the night," Tae-chon said smoothly. He stood up. "The air is indeed too dry. It is bad for my luck." Chairman Han slammed his hand on the table. "You cannot leave. We are not finished." "The house always closes eventually," Tae-chon said. He turned his back on the table. He turned his back on Han. And most dangerously, he turned his back on June. He walked toward the door. As he passed Seraphina, he didn't stop, but he whispered one word. "Office." Seraphina watched him go. She looked back at June. The lieutenant was standing frozen, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He knew the game was over. The pattern was broken. Seraphina smoothed her jacket, turned on her heel, and followed her boss out of the room. The silence she left behind was louder than a gunshot. The glass office was silent. Below them, the casino floor was still buzzing with the noise of money changing hands, but up here, the air was thick and cold. Seraphina stood in the center of the room. She kept her hands clasped behind her back to stop them from shaking. She wasn't scared, but her mind was racing. Her brain was a computer that had found a virus, and she needed to delete it. Kim Tae-chon stood by the window. He was looking out at the city lights, his back to her. He took a sip of amber liquid from a crystal glass. "June is betraying you," Seraphina said. Her voice was clear. She didn't whisper. She didn't hesitate. She stated it like a fact, like saying the sky is blue. Tae-chon didn't turn around. He swirled the drink in his glass. The ice clinked softly. "June has been my brother for 10 years, Tae-chon said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "He took a bullet for me in Busan. He saved my life when a car bomb exploded in Seoul. You have been my employee for 1 week, and you think you know him better than I do." "I don't know him," Seraphina replied. "I know patterns, and tonight his pattern was broken." She walked closer to the desk, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She needed him to understand. This wasn't about feelings. This was about math. "Every time you had a winning hand, he touched his lapel," she explained, counting on her fingers. "Every time you had a losing hand, he touched his tie. Chairman Han won $300,000 in 20 minutes. That is statistically impossible without help." Tae-chon finally turned around. He looked at her with eyes that were hard and unreadable. He placed his glass on the desk. "Maybe his neck was itchy," Tae-chon said. "Maybe he was nervous because the stakes were high. You see patterns everywhere, Seraphina. Sometimes a scratch is just a scratch. Seraphina felt a flash of frustration. It was a new feeling for her. Usually, she didn't care if people made mistakes, but this mistake was going to get him killed. He is selling you out, she insisted. If Chairman Han knows your cards, he knows your plans. You cannot trust June. Tae-chon laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a short, sharp sound. He walked over to a mirror hanging on the wall and began to adjust his tie. He looked at his own reflection, fixing the knot with perfect precision. You worry too much, he said. Tomorrow, everything will be settled. I have arranged a summit with Chairman Han. We are meeting at the Sapphire Tea House at noon. Seraphina froze. A summit. A peace treaty, Tae-chon corrected. He smoothed down his suit jacket. We will divide the shipping routes. Han gets the North Port, I get the South. We shake hands, we drink tea. The war ends. It's a trap, Seraphina said instantly. If Han is cheating you at poker, he isn't interested in peace. He is interested in taking everything. If you go to that tea house, you are walking into a cage. Tae-chon turned to face her. He looked arrogant. He looked like a king who believed he could stop the rain just by commanding it. I am the tiger of this city, he said, stepping closer to her. He was tall, looming over her. Han is a snake. Snakes do not eat tigers, they run away. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair away from her face. His touch was gentle, but his words were sharp. You are a good floor manager, Seraphina. You count cards well. You spot cheaters well. But do not think you understand the politics of men. Stick to the numbers. Leave the war to me. He walked past her toward the door. Go home, get some sleep. I need you sharp for the evening shift tomorrow. Seraphina stood alone in the office. She heard the heavy door click shut behind him. She should have left. She should have gone back to her quiet apartment, taken off the suit, and gone to sleep. She had done her job. She had warned him. If he was too proud to listen, that was his problem. It wasn't her life. But she couldn't move. She stared at the empty glass on the desk. She thought about the way Tae-chon had looked in the mirror. She replayed the conversation in her head. Snakes do not eat tigers. Tae-chon wasn't stupid. A stupid man doesn't run a criminal empire for 10 years. A stupid man doesn't notice a waitress in a diner who isn't scared. He saw everything. Seraphina walked to the mirror where he had stood. She looked at her own reflection. The red lipstick was still perfect. The suit was still sharp. Why would he dismiss her warning? Why would he agree to meet a man who was cheating him? Then the realization hit her. It clicked into place like a key in a lock. He wasn't dismissing her, he was testing her. Or maybe he was testing himself. He knew, deep down, he knew June was a traitor, but knowing it and seeing it were two different things. He needed proof. He needed to see the snake bite before he could cut off its head. He was going to the tea house because it was a trap. He was using himself as bait. Seraphina felt a cold chill run down her spine. If he went alone, with only June for protection, he would die. The tiger was walking into a pit, hoping he was strong enough to climb back out. He had told her to go home. He had told her to stick to the numbers. He gave her an out. He was giving her permission to be safe, to go back to being a bystander. Seraphina looked at her watch. It was 4:00 a.m. The summit was in 8 hours. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. It wasn't a calculator. It wasn't a pen. It was the key to the lost and found box from the diner. When she had left the diner that last day, she had taken something with her. Something the robber had dropped in his panic, or maybe something another customer had left behind years ago. She pulled her hand out of her pocket. She didn't hold a weapon, but she held a decision. Stick to the numbers, she whispered to the empty room. She did the math in her head. Tae-chon plus June plus Chairman Han equals death. Tae-chon plus June plus Chairman Han plus Seraphina equals a variable they didn't expect. She turned off the lights in the office. She didn't go home. She went to the elevator, but she didn't press the button for the lobby. She pressed the button for the garage. If the king was going to be arrogant, the queen had to be prepared. The sapphire tea house was a beautiful trap. It sat in the middle of a garden filled with wet stones and bamboo. The walls were made of paper and wood, so thin that a strong wind might blow them down. Inside, it was silent. Seraphina stood in the corner of the private room. She wasn't supposed to be there. Tae-chon had told her to go home, but when he walked out to his car that morning, she was already sitting in the passenger seat, wearing her black suit and applying her red lipstick. She didn't say a word. She just buckled her seatbelt. Tae-chon had looked at her, sighed, and let the driver take them both. Now she watched. Kim Tae-chon sat on a silk cushion on the floor. Across the low wooden table sat Chairman Han. The rival boss looked like a reptile. He smiled too much, showing teeth that looked yellow against his dark suit. "This tea is excellent," Han said, lifting a tiny porcelain cup. "It tastes like forgiveness." Tae-chon didn't drink. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. "Let us skip the poetry, Han. We are here to talk about the shipping routes." "Of course," Han said. He set the cup down. "The South Port is yours, the North is mine. We stop the fighting, we make money. Simple." It was too simple. Seraphina's eyes scanned the room. One exit, sliding paper doors, no windows. Behind Tae-chon stood June. He was the loyal statue, the bodyguard. But Seraphina saw the sweat on the back of his neck. She saw his fingers twitching near his belt. Tap, tap. Chairman Han tapped the table twice with his ring. It was the same sound Seraphina had heard in the casino. Suddenly the air in the room changed. It got heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "There is just one problem, Tae-chon," Han said softly. "Tigers eat too much, and I am tired of sharing my food." Han looked up at June. June didn't look at his boss. He didn't look at Seraphina. He turned around and walked to the only door in the room. Click. He slid the heavy wooden lock into place. Tae-chon didn't turn around. He stared at Han, his face betraying nothing. "June, why is the door locked?" "I'm sorry, brother," June whispered. His voice shook. "Han made a better offer. He offered me the city. You only offered me a job." Tae-chon closed his eyes for a second. It was the only sign of pain he showed. When he opened them, they were cold again. "You are not a brother. You are a fool." Chairman Han laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "He is a rich fool now, and you, Tae-chon, you are a dead legend." Han snapped his fingers. From behind the paper screens at the back of the room, shadows moved. Rip. A blade sliced through the paper wall. 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in dark clothes, holding long knives that gleamed in the dim light. They blocked the only way out. Tae-chon stood up slowly. He was unarmed. He had left his gun in the car as a sign of trust. A peace summit meant no weapons. He was the king of the city, but right now, he was just a man in a nice suit surrounded by wolves. "Make it quick," Han ordered his men. "I have a lunch reservation." The assassin stepped forward. June stayed by the door, his hand on his own gun, watching to make sure no one escaped. Seraphina took a step forward from the corner. Her heels made a sharp clack on the wooden floor. Everyone looked at her. They had almost forgotten she was there. To them, she was just staff, a shadow in a suit. "This is inefficient," Seraphina said. Her voice was bored. It sounded like she was complaining about a slow coffee order. Chairman Han frowned. "Who is this? Your secretary? Sit down, girl, or you die first." Seraphina didn't sit. She walked toward the table. She looked at the 3 men with knives. She calculated the distance. 10 feet, too far to run, too close to fight. "You didn't check the guest list," Seraphina said to Han. She looked at June. "And you didn't check my purse." June's eyes widened. He realized his mistake. He had checked Tae-chon for weapons. He hadn't checked the floor manager. Seraphina reached into her small, black leather handbag. She didn't rush. Her movements were smooth and practiced. She pulled out a gun. It wasn't a sleek, modern weapon like the ones the Mafia used. It was old. It was heavy. It was a snub-nosed .38 revolver, rusted near the handle. It was the lost and found gun from the diner. A drug dealer had left it in a booth 3 years ago, and Seraphina had kept it in a box under the counter, just in case. It was ugly, but bullets don't care if a gun is pretty. She leveled the weapon at Chairman Han. She didn't hold it sideways like a gangster in a movie. She held it with 2 hands, her stance wide and balanced, just like her father, a corrupt cop, had taught her when she was a little girl. "Sit down," Seraphina commanded. Han froze. The 3 assassins hesitated. They looked at Han for orders. "She won't shoot," Han sneered, though he looked nervous. "She's a waitress." "I am a floor manager," Seraphina corrected, "and I hate a mess." She shifted her aim slightly, not at Han, but at a priceless vase sitting on a shelf behind him. Bang! The sound was deafening in the small room. The vase exploded into 1,000 pieces of ceramic dust. Han jumped. June flinched against the door. Tae-chon didn't move, but a small smile touched his lips. "The next one goes in your knee," Seraphina said calmly. She pulled the hammer of the revolver back. Click. Then the other knee. Then the stomach. The stomach is a slow way to die, very messy. She looked at June. "Unlock the door." June looked at his new boss, Han. Then he looked at the crazy woman with the rusty gun and the dead eyes. He realized that Han wasn't going to save him. "Unlock it," Seraphina shouted. It was the first time she had raised her voice. It cracked like a whip. June scrambled for the lock. His hands were shaking so hard he fumbled with the latch. "Tae-chon," Seraphina said, never taking her eyes off Han. "We are leaving." Tae-chon walked around the table. He stopped in front of Chairman Han. He picked up the teapot and poured the hot liquid onto Han's lap. Han screamed and jumped up, knocking his chair over. "Thank you for the tea," Tae-chon said. He walked to the door. June finally got it open and stepped back, hands raised in surrender. Tae-chon walked past him without even looking at his face. He walked out into the garden rain. Seraphina backed out of the room. She kept the gun pointed at the assassins until she was through the doorway. "Don't follow us," she said. "I still have 4 bullets. That's 1 for each of you and 1 for the traitor." She stepped out into the rain, slamming the heavy door shut behind her. Tae-chon was waiting by the garden gate. He looked at her. He looked at the rusty gun in her hand. He looked at the red lipstick that hadn't smudged a bit. "You brought a gun to a peace summit," he said. "I brought insurance," Seraphina replied. She dropped the heavy revolver back into her purse. "And you owe me a new purse. The gunpowder is going to ruin the lining." Tae-chon laughed. It was a real laugh this time, loud and full of adrenaline. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and strong. "I will buy you 1,000 purses," he said. "Now run." The rain in the garden was different from the rain in the city. In the city, the rain washed away dirt. Here, among the bamboo and the wet stones, it felt like it was washing away the world, leaving only the 2 of them. Seraphina ran. Her heels sank into the mud, ruining her expensive shoes, but she didn't care. She gripped Kim Tae-chon's hand. His palm was warm, a burning anchor in the cold storm. They reached the wooden gate at the edge of the garden, the only way out to the street where the car was waiting. But the gate didn't open. A figure stepped out from the shadows of a large stone lantern. It was June. He looked terrible. His suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held a sleek black pistol in a shaking hand, pointing it straight at Tae-chon's chest. "I can't let you leave, boss," June shouted over the sound of the rain. "If you leave, Han kills me. If you stay, I get the city. It's just business." Tae-chon stopped. He didn't let go of Seraphina's hand. He pulled her slightly behind him, shielding her body with his own. "It is not business, June," Tae-chon said, his voice low and dangerous. It is suicide. Han will kill you the moment I am dead. You are a loose end." "Shut up," June yelled. The gun wavered. "Just don't make it hard." Seraphina stood behind Tae-chon. She looked at the back of his suit jacket. She saw the way his muscles were tensed, ready to take a bullet for her. And then it happened. For the first time in 3 years, Seraphina felt something. Usually her heart was a slow, steady drum. Thump, thump, thump. It was a boring rhythm. It was the rhythm of someone who was just waiting to die. But now she felt a flutter in her chest. Thump, thump, thump. It got faster. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't fear. She knew what fear felt like. Fear was cold and shrinking. This was hot. It was expanding. It rushed into her ears like a roaring train. She looked at June, this traitor, this messy, chaotic variable who dared to threaten the only person who had ever seen her. She wasn't scared of dying. She was furious that June was trying to break something that belonged to her. Tae-chon was hers. The job was hers. The order they had built was hers. Her vision didn't tunnel. It got sharper. She saw the raindrops falling in slow motion. She saw the tension in June's trigger finger. She saw the exact distance between Tae-chon and the traitor, 6 feet. She squeezed Tae-chon's hand. It was a signal. "June," Seraphina said. Her voice wasn't flat anymore. It had a razor edge to it. June flicked his eyes toward her. "Stay out of this, waitress." "You forgot something," she said. "What?" June asked, distracted for a split second. "The math." Seraphina didn't reach for the gun in her purse. That would take too long. Instead, she swung the heavy leather bag with all her strength. She didn't throw it at June. That was too easy to dodge. She threw it at Tae-chon. It was a move of pure chaos. The heavy bag, weighted down by the rusty revolver inside, hit Tae-chon square in the chest. Tae-chon gasped, stumbling backward. June flinched. He hadn't expected her to attack her own boss. His brain froze for a second, trying to understand the pattern. He lowered the gun reflexively, confused by the sudden movement. That 1 second was all Tae-chon needed. He realized instantly what Seraphina was doing. She wasn't attacking him. She was moving him out of the line of fire and creating a gap. Tae-chon lunged. He moved like a striking viper. He closed the 6 feet in a heartbeat. His hand chopped down on June's wrist. Crack! June screamed. The black pistol flew out of his hand and skittered across the wet stones. Tae-chon followed up with a knee to the stomach, sending June crashing into the mud. But the fight wasn't over. "There," a voice shouted from the tea house. The 3 assassins had caught up. They burst through the bamboo, their knives gleaming in the moonlight. They saw June on the ground and Tae-chon unarmed. They charged. Tae-chon spun around. He was fast, but there were 3 of them. "Seraphina," he yelled. Seraphina was already moving. She dropped to her knees in the mud, not to beg, but to grab her purse. She ripped the zipper open. Her hand found the cold, rusted steel of the .38 revolver. She stood up. Tae-chon was fighting the first assassin, blocking a knife slash with his forearm. The second assassin was circling him. The third was running straight for Seraphina. She lifted the gun. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, 180 beats per minute, but her hands were stone. The assassin raised his knife, screaming a battle cry. Seraphina didn't blink, she didn't hesitate. She waited until he was 5 steps away, 4 steps, 3. Bang! The gunshot echoed through the garden, louder than the thunder. The assassin crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. Tae-chon used the distraction to throw the first attacker over his hip. He snatched the knife from the ground and turned to face the last man standing. The remaining assassin looked at his fallen friend. Then he looked at Seraphina. She stood there in the rain, her black suit covered in mud, her hair finally coming loose from its perfect bun. But her face was terrifying. The hollow look was gone. The boredom was gone. Her eyes were wide, dark, and burning with a terrifying focus. She looked like a predator that had finally woken up from a long hibernation. She cocked the hammer of the revolver. Click. "I have 3 bullets left," she said. Her voice was alive. "Do you want to be a statistic?" The assassin looked at Tae-chon, who was holding a knife and smiling like a demon. Then he looked at the woman with the gun. He dropped his knife and ran back toward the tea house. Silence returned to the garden, broken only by the groans of June in the mud and the heavy breathing of the 2 survivors. Tae-chon walked over to Seraphina. He didn't look at the enemies, he looked at her. He reached out and took the gun from her hand, gently lowering it. Then he grabbed her shoulders. He looked into her eyes. "You are shaking," he said softly. Seraphina looked at her hands. They were trembling, the adrenaline was flooding her system. She felt dizzy. She felt hot. She felt real. "My heart," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "It's beating so fast." Tae-chon smiled. He wiped a streak of mud from her cheek, smearing her red lipstick slightly. It made her look wild. "Good," he said. "That means you are finally alive." Seraphina looked up at him. The numbness was gone. In its place was a fierce, protective fire. She grabbed the lapels of his ruined suit and pulled him close. "We need to finish this," she said. "We need to find the head of the snake." Tae-chon nodded. He turned to look at June, who was trying to crawl away in the mud. "Yes," Tae-chon said, "but first we clean up the mess." The rain had stopped, leaving the garden quiet and heavy with the smell of wet earth. The storm had washed away the blood on the stones, but it couldn't wash away what had just happened. June lay in the mud, defeated. He wasn't the scary lieutenant anymore. He was just a man who had made a bad bet and lost. He looked up at Kim Tae-chon, his eyes full of fear and regret. "Boss," June whispered, I can fix this." Tae-chon looked down at him. He didn't look angry. He looked sad, like he was looking at a broken toy that couldn't be glued back together. "You cannot fix a broken loyalty, June," Tae-chon said quietly. "A crack in the foundation brings the whole house down." Tae-chon turned away. He didn't need to do anything else. From the shadows of the garden gate, 3 men in black suits appeared. They were Tae-chon's real loyalists, the ones who hadn't turned. They moved silently, stepping around the puddles. They didn't speak. They just nodded to Tae-chon and moved toward June. Tae-chon walked over to Seraphina. He put a hand on her back and guided her away from the scene. He didn't want her to watch the end of his old friend. That was a mercy. They walked out of the garden gate and onto the wet pavement of the street. The black Maybach was waiting there, its engine humming softly. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in the middle of a war zone. Seraphina leaned against the cold metal of the car. Her legs felt a little wobbly, but her mind was clear. She looked down at her suit. The expensive black silk was ruined. It was torn at the shoulder and covered in mud. Her shoes were destroyed. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Tae-chon stood in front of her. He took off his own suit jacket, which was also muddy, and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm. "It is over," he said. "Han ran away, June is gone, the city is quiet again." Seraphina nodded. She took a deep breath, tasting the clean air. The math worked out. Tae-chon studied her face. He looked at the smear of mud on her cheek and the loose strands of hair that had escaped her perfect bun. He looked at the gun that was still heavy in her purse. "Seraphina," he said seriously, "listen to me." She looked up, meeting his dark eyes. "Tonight you saw the truth," Tae-chon said. "You saw the blood, you saw the betrayal, you saw that this life is not a game. It is dangerous. It is ugly." He took a step back, giving her space. "You saved my life," he continued. "You paid your debt. You don't have to stay. If you want, I can give you enough money to go anywhere in the world. You can buy a house by the ocean. You can open your own restaurant. You can be safe." He waited. He was giving her a choice. He was opening the cage door. Seraphina looked at the empty street. She thought about the Blue Moon Diner. She thought about the smell of burnt coffee and grease. She thought about the buzzing neon lights and the rude customers who snapped their fingers at her. She thought about standing behind a counter, invisible, watching the clock tick slowly until her shift ended. She thought about being safe. Safe was boring, safe was numb. Then she looked at Tae-chon. She looked at the man who had seen the fire inside her when everyone else only saw ice. She thought about the rush of her heart beating at 180 beats per minute. She thought about the weight of the gun in her hand and the feeling of power when she pulled the trigger. She reached into her purse. She didn't pull out the gun. She pulled out her compact mirror and the tube of Victory Red lipstick. Tae-chon watched her silent. Seraphina opened the mirror. She looked at her reflection. She looked wild and messy, but her eyes were bright. With quick, practiced fingers, she smoothed her hair back. She twisted the loose strands until her bun was tight and perfect again. She opened the lipstick. She leaned into the mirror. One swipe, two swipes. She pressed her lips together. The red line was sharp and perfect. It was a declaration of war. She snapped the compact shut and dropped it back into her purse. Then, she looked Tae-chon right in the eye. "You think I want to be safe?" she asked. Her voice was steady and cool. "You think I want to go back to wiping tables and serving coffee to people who don't even look at my face?" She stepped closer to him. She reached out and straightened his collar, her fingers brushing against his neck. "No," she said. "The diner is closed. I found a new game and I'm winning." Tae-chon stared at her for a second, surprised. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't the polite smile of a businessman. It was the dangerous, proud smile of a king who had found his queen. "Then let's go," he said. "We have a lot of work to do. The floor needs managing." "The floor is a mess." Seraphina corrected him, "But I'll clean it up." Tae-chon opened the car door for her. Seraphina didn't hesitate. She slid into the leather seat, pulling his jacket tighter around her shoulders. As Tae-chon got in beside her, the driver looked in the rearview mirror. "Where to, chairman?" Tae-chon looked at Seraphina. She was already checking her watch, calculating the time it would take to get back to the Golden Lotus. "Home," Seraphina answered for him. "Take us to the casino." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly through the wet streets. Behind them, the sapphire tea house disappeared into the dark. Seraphina rested her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. She checked her pulse one last time. It was slow again, steady, thump, thump, thump. But it wasn't the rhythm of a ghost anymore. It was the rhythm of a predator waiting for the next challenge. She wasn't the waitress. She wasn't the robot. She was the algorithm that solved the chaos. And sitting next to the most dangerous man in the city, holding his hand in the dark, she knew one thing for sure. She was exactly where she belonged.